Hello.
Hello. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's so nice to see you again.
It makes it much less awkward than if we were here alone.
Yeah. Cool. Things are interesting in Ontario. And a big thing happened. So our premier, who passed legislation to take away workers' rights and to impose a contract on workers, has now will repeal the legislation. So everyone's back to work except for the Go Bus folks. And so we totally acknowledge that this is still affecting your lives, and everything that we talked about the last time holds. So get in touch. Some of you already have, about some of the ways that the strike is affecting you and how we might be able to support you. So that hasn't changed, but CUPE is back to work for now, although they could always strike again because they're in negotiations. But it doesn't look like there's going to be a general strike on Monday. So I don't think there's a general strike on Monday, which means we will see you on Monday, and just proceed as best we can to get through as much as we can of the course as we intended. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Folks are still coming in. Come on in.
But from our perspective, this is good news because
Yeah.
it means that we can do a lot less caretaking and a lot of more physiology-ing.
Yeah, which is great.
Yep.
Physiology is amazing.
Yep. We are going to be doing some lovely things. We'll talk about foxes.
Yeah.
We'll talk about polar bears.
Yeah.
We'll talk about lots of things.
Lots
Arctic
of
things.
Arctic things. Okay, are you ready?
Am I ready?
Oh, yeah.
As ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, here we go.
How's my hair?
I'm having a really bad hair day, which is why Smith keeps on saying this. He offered me a hat, but the hat's pretty ridiculous. So anyway, okay. So
that's right. Your hair does not disappear into the white wall above you, as my head does.
There's a gradient. Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna do some stuff. This is what the slide says. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to introduce to you some more scales. So we did biological levels of organization, right? We did geographic scales. What else have we done? We've done other things. What we want to introduce to you is a physiological time scale. It's kind of simple. It's got 3 parts to it. But it's really
let's not say it's simple. Let's say
elegant.
It's intuitive.
It's elegant too, because like a lot of things fall from those categories, which is really cool. So I love it because it's elegant, right? It's simple. So the 3 things are acute, chronic, and evolutionary. We also call evolutionary generational as well, for I think hopefully obvious reasons. So these are the 3 words, but you will see generational as well with evolutionary. So it means the same thing.
And if we're going to be talking about the effect of climate change in the Arctic on the organisms that call it home, of course, we have to be considering all 3 of these timescales. So it's important for us as biodiversity scientists, as humans dealing with the Anthropocene, to be able to understand whether we're looking at effects that are happening in a short scale, a medium scale, or a long scale.
Yeah. Okay. So what do we mean by this? Well, they're kind of fuzzy boundaries, and it really depends.
Again!
Why might it depend? Okay, so when we talk about acute, we talk about immediate. And not only an immediate response, but a temporary response. Okay, so and also remember there are timescales for both the stimulus and the response. And more often than not, these 2 things coincide. So like an acute stimulus yields an acute response, right? Chronic. But there are some delightful exceptions that are so cool. So it's not always the case, but generally we have this immediate and temporary response. So, immediate, you're really cold, you start shivering. As soon as the cold goes away, you stop shivering, kind of deal. Chronic, also known as acclimatization. And this is where things can get confusing in biology vocabulary, because physiologists also call it adaptation and evolutionary biologists are like, no, it's not. But anyway, so just kind of keep that in mind that when we're talking about physiology, some folks will use the word adaptation to mean acclimation or acclimatization. And so what this is a kind of delayed, gradual, and sustained physiological response that often includes changes in set points. So you might be wondering what a set point is.
What is a set point?
What is a set point, Dr. Smith?
What is a set point?
So
I'm the one who's wondering.
you experience changes in set points when we go through seasonal changes in temperature, for example. So I'm thinking about like dude who's walking down the street in March in a pair of shorts.
Yeah, and compared to perhaps the same person of unspecified gender who in November, when it's only, say, 4 degrees Celsius in the morning, has on a toque, 4 pairs of gloves, 3 coats, and large boots.
Right. So we get used through the summer to warmer temperatures. Our set points change. That means that
higher.
The temperatures that where we would initiate behavioral changes change. Right. The set point of that initiation of that behavior changes, and so we think it's freaking cold in October, but then same temperature in March just feels glorious, right? Yeah. Because our set point changes again throughout the winter.
Shorts, sandals, and salting the road.
Exactly. Okay. So evolutionary, obviously this is something that's going to happen over time. And here, of course, we do associate it with the evolution of adaptation, right? Where selection happens in order to adapt to certain conditions and things like this.
So if your scenario of your dude who moved to a new school and shows up in March always in shorts and sandals is somehow more attractive to people in the local area because they're like, wow, look at the nice legs.
Then that would be evolutionary.
And then they reproduce and produce lots of little children who wear nothing but shorts and sandals in March, and eventually the town fills up and it becomes known as the town of shorts and sandals.
Okay. Yes, you're not wrong. Okay. So we want to obviously, as best as possible, be precise, and there are some complications associated with that because life is diverse and wonderful, and so it's really hard to give you like a set thing going, okay, if this happens within 3 minutes, it's this. If it happens within 2 hours, it's that kind of deal. That's impossible. And so share with us why that might be an impossible thing to do.
So some ideas about why these boundaries in time and absolute values are fuzzy. In the chat, what do you see as a biologist when you look at the world of organisms? Are they uniformly sized?
No ideas. It's a slow morning. It's fine. You want us to just keep on going?
Oh, well, what is normal?
Well, what is normal? That's
okay,
amazing.
So fair enough. I love it. Many may happen simultaneously.
Ooh.
Yep. Different reactions to their environment.
Very good.
Yep.
Go. Keep going. Time is relative.
You're right, dude. Continued change over time. Acute changes may be overlooked on a large scale.
Okay.
What about... Join the chat.
Welcome.
So we're thinking about organisms here. There's often a great big dichotomy in animals, in the animal world, where we think about animals like ourselves, who have to do a certain thing in the interior parts of our body, versus animals like the ant that you see here in my hand, imaginary ant, or this fish above me. What's one of the kind of principal differences about how we do that? Some species are just dumb as bricks and refuse to change. Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Good. So it's super relative, right? Think about the generation time of a species of bacteria versus the generational time of an elephant. And so these types of things and organisms experience time differently, right? or fruit fly generational times and things like this. So, a fruit fly generational time could certainly be minutes to hours. It could be, there are some organisms where generational is weeks to years. And so it really does depend on the natural history and the biology of the organisms. And so all of this stuff needs to then be framed from the perspective of the organism. Okay. And so that's a critical sort of component to this time scale.
And so one of the things, just as we brought up scales a bunch of times throughout the course so far, but this is a really important one where physical scaling comes in, where how big you are generally correlates with how long your generation is, which, so bigness matters.
And so the outcomes can be different depending upon the experienced time scale, right? Sometimes it's not a big deal, and sometimes it can be catastrophic, right, with respect to like extinction and stuff like that. So we have this kind of graph here to give you some example, or this figure to give you some examples, but certainly there are all sorts of it depends that come into it, and those are the types of things that we like to talk about, so we will.
Yeah, this is kind of an orientation slide, right? So, I mean, we come back to it with examples in the future about, well, where would this fall when we present you with this thing or this gentleman?
Yes.
Where does this fall?
So,
hands up in the chat if you don't recognize who this is. Or please recognize who this is.
Rick Mercer. No idea? Do we still know who Rick Mercer is? Don't know.
Well, hooray. This is Rick Mercer.
This is a very funny Canadian from Newfoundland.
One of the founding cast members for This Hour's 22 Minutes, which is still on, and he was Rick Mercer Reports talking to Americans.
I love him! Yay, Rick Mercer of the Report for it. Yes, thank you.
Of the Report fan. And winner of the Stephen Leacock Medal in Humor, I believe.
Oh, wonderful.
So if this is jumpy, we're going to jump into a YouTube video here in the YouTube. There's the link later on. You can touch this when you get the PDF, and if you're sitting with two multiple devices, you can scan the QR code. That'll also take you on your telephone.
Okay, tell us if it's so bad that like you can't watch it, and we'll pop the link into the chat so y'all can just watch it on your own. But let's give it a try to watch it together. Let's watch. Nothing's happening. Press it again.
It is the mandate of this show to ask questions that have never been answered, to answer questions that perhaps should be left unanswered. It's a dangerous job, but it's the job that we have before us. And today, I ask the most loaded, dangerous question of them all. When it comes to weather in this country, who are the toughest city folk? I'm saying Winnipeg. And we're gonna get mail on this one. Why won't you talk to us? What is this about?
This
Middle of November, look at this.
I know.
Airport closed.
You could expect this at any time in Winnipeg, and it's not really that bad.
Look at all this snow. It's the middle of November. How come you're wearing shoes and not boots?
I don't have boots. I got dress shoes.
You don't have boots?
No.
Don't have a hat? No.
Winnipeg just refused to accept reality.
Winter in Winnipeg, it slows the mosquitoes down.
Who's the toughest Winnipegger?
Dr. Popsicle. Dr. Popsicle.
Who the heck is Dr. Popsicle?
He's at the U of M. He's a prof. He survived the northern rigors of Lake Winnipeg.
And now I'm here in the lab with Dr. Popsicle, Professor Popsicle.
That's what they've called me at times. My name is Gordon Giesbrecht. Welcome to the lab.
Hello, Gordon. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. So I've been on the streets of Winnipeg, and a number of people have said you're the toughest Winnipegger.
Well, I don't know about that, but I've probably been colder than most people.
What do you do?
Well, we study how people respond to cold water, sometimes ice cold water.
That's your job.
That's what we do.
So students pay to study with you, and then you give them hypothermia, is that the idea?
Actually,
Have you given any students hypothermia?
oh yeah, many. Yes.
But that's very
Hundreds.
painful.
It is painful, and that's why we actually pay them.
Oh, how much do they get paid? A lot?
$100 each time they come. Because we deal with temperature all the time.
Hello, what's that?
We generally want to know what's happening with people's core temperature.
$100.
It's not looking like so much money anymore, eh?
No.
We normally stick this in the nose, and it goes in behind, down the esophagus to the heart. and then we get an idea of what heart temperature is. Okay.
Can I close my eyes? Okay. Is it?
Okay, and I just stick that in. And then you start. Ah, perfect. Nicely done. Now, if you could hold on to that, please, because we wouldn't want to lose that. We've got to put this on.
Oh. Did you shovel out this morning?
No, I actually have someone do it for me.
You don't like shoveling?
Well, I'm not big on it.
No. Too cold? What's that beeping noise?
That is your heart beating.
That's beeping too fast, don't you think?
Yeah.
Are you trained
yeah.
in CPR?
Yes.
You are.
And we actually have a defibrillator over there, so that's really...
Why would you have a defibrillator, sir? You really have a defibrillator?
Safety first, yeah. We do.
Well, that makes me feel so much better.
Beep, 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 beep. Okay, no. That's enough.
That's plenty. That's good.
Plenty of ice.
No, not this. Relax.
Has anyone ever got stuck in the winch? No. Because that would be a relief at this point.
Put your feet in the water. Here we go. Put your feet in the water. Here we go. Thank you. Thank you. Here we go.
I'm on fire. Why am I on fire? Why is it a fire feeling?
Because the receptors on your skin are now being very cold and
Why
they're
can't
just
I
firing
hear?
off.
Why can't I hear my heart?
It's still working.
Okay, and how am I helping mankind and Canadians who fall through the ice in future? Please, quickly, sir.
Well, what we tell people is this is the cold shock you've just gone through. And if you were in ice water, you would be hyperventilating and gasping.
But I'm not, because I'm calm, because I'm brave.
Yes, yes. And
Because I'm brave.
would you mind if I put some just a little more ice in here? Is that okay?
Yes. No. What's that? Okay. Oh, gee, it's dropping. It's like that's unbelievable.
If you could quickly get to some
I
place where
think
you
my
get warm up.
penis is actually inverted. I mean, I've had shrinkage before, but I think this has gone beyond shrinkage.
So would you like to get warmed up now?
No! Yeah, I'm good. Yes!
Here we go. Feet up.
Now what's this?
This is warm water.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's hot.
Are you smiling?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
That's good.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Oh, that's good. Thank you very much. Winnipeg's toughest dude.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming to the lab.
Thank you. I'll never do it again.
Oh.
Here we are.
Did you see it? We can pop the link in the chat for later. But I hope that most of you were able to see it. Yeah, the QR code is right there, so you could go directly there and watch it. Yay, thank you. The occasional time that QR codes are helpful. Wonderful. So
Why
what?
the slag and QR codes?
No,
It's 2 letters, but a whole bunch of E's. Point it, go.
So acute, right? That is, I think, a perfect example of an acute stimulus.
He's cute.
With acute reaction, right? So heart elevated, this kind of feeling of hyperventilating or this feeling of like, oh my goodness, deep crisis, right? That then very quickly goes away as soon as that stimulus is removed. Okay, so that's what we mean by acute. Let's think a little bit about what sort of the equivalence of chronic or generational, kind of like, okay, fine, this is an exposure to cold. What is that going to look like if we extend the time scale, right? So here's the question. And, we're having some pretty interesting time scales. There we go. Interesting challenges with the interwebs today again. So here you go. Okay. Thank you, thank you. So, here's what we've got for results. That's really good. Because it gives us an opportunity to kind of think about some of these things. So here we have Rick took a freezing cold bath every day for 5 minutes. Now, I would argue that that would be a repeated acute, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's short duration. And so chronic is an extended stimulus, right?
Stay in the bath.
Stay in the bath for like hours and hours and hours, maybe. But even that might be acute for Rick. But like, so I would say that C is actually still acute. Rick is from Newfoundland, but goes to Winnipeg to film a show once a year. Again, I would say that that would be fairly acute as well. Rick moved to Winnipeg. Now, this would be interesting because I would say that this is more chronic because Winnipeg obviously isn't going to be freezing cold all the time. So it's going to be a seasonal exposure to like really cold temperatures, and the rest of the time it'll be summer temperatures or spring or whatever. So to me, this is more chronic. And then the first one is certainly more evolutionary and more generational, right? The human species evolved in Winnipeg and all humans are descended from there. That would be a more generational or evolutionary statement. These things have fuzzy borders though, so you know, don't worry about it. But just to try to understand, like as we make things more precise, where we're going to, or how we might argue that it's one versus another.
And that's kind of related to one of the questions that popped up in the chat, which is how can death be a consequence of both acute and chronic?
Yeah.
And it has to do with the fuzzy borders, because it is a consequence of something that is acute, but perhaps too large, or chronic and too long. So
Yeah.
it's the context, it depends. But
Yeah.
death is then not a default consequence, but like a potential consequence of an acute or a
Yeah.
chronic exposure.
It depends on the amplitude, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about heat exposure, right? If you get exposed to intense and incredible heat,
Like,
yeah, you'll die.
the sun. You
the
watch
sun.
Avenue 5, the ship keeps going into the sun. That's acute.
Yeah. If you get exposed to less heat, but still intense heat, your body will try to overcome that to the point of not being able to maintain homeostasis. And so that would be more of a chronic exposure with a chronic response that also ends in death, just a slower death. Wait, on that delightful note, let's move on.
Could death also be considered evolutionary since some species are biologically immortal? I'm not sure that phrase, biologically immortal. I mean, species go extinct. All of
Yeah.
them will.
Yeah. So yeah, and
So I'm
so
not sure if I
far,
understand the
yeah,
question.
so far as no one's arguing for why death is adaptive. There are some behaviors or some things that do result in the death of individuals, but it isn't the death that's adaptive. That's just the cost.
I see. They're thinking about with the jellyfish. Yeah, those are.
They're really
Take
long-lived.
2700.
Yeah.
We'll dive into the differences, but it's has been called that. You are correct, but it is not really.
Okay. What would Rick have to do to make his acute exposure generational? So let's kind of, you can write different places, you can write in the chat. So we did a chronic exposure. What would the equivalent of exposure to the cold or response to the cold be in a generational timescale?
Live and reproduce in the ice bath.
Yeah, that's good.
Raise his family in Winnipeg.
Put it in his will. Yeah, good.
Moves to Winnipeg, has children there.
Yeah, that's good. Moves to Winnipeg, has children there, right?
Marrying Smo from Winnipeg.
Yeah. Good.
Moves to Winnipeg, has children. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone from Winnipeg. Good. Okay. Excellent. Good. Okay. Thank you. That's great. So, what would happen if instead of Rick in the cold water, we put a fish in cold water? What's the difference? What are some of the things that the answer depends upon?
Does the fish have a bicycle? Or does Rick have a bicycle?
No. Why? Explain your joke.
No.
No? Okay.
It doesn't get funnier. I have learned through
So-
decades of experience.
What's if the fish is used?
Exo or
yeah.
endothermic
Good.
heat control.
Good.
That's the fish's home. If
Yeah.
the fish, how the body reacts to the
Good.
cold, how much temperature the fish can handle. If the fish is used to colder temperatures.
Yeah.
Some fish basically have antifreeze in their blood.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Good. Yeah.
Time span.
Good. Excellent. Yeah, these are all really good.
Fish are ectotherms. That's
Good.
it. Yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you. That's great. Okay, so speaking of which, let's talk about those things. So we want to introduce some more vocabulary. So we just did a time scale. Now we're going to do a couple of concepts. The first one is going to be the difference between conformers and regulators. Okay, so conformers allow the external environment to dictate the internal environmental conditions, whereas regulators work to push against the external environmental conditions to create a more stable internal environmental condition.
And I think probably right off the bat, you're thinking your mind is jumping to temperature because this is a very clear example of different strategies across the world of animalis where we see examples of one or the other. And I think one of the cool things about diving into some of these examples, as we will, is that again, it's fuzzy.
It's fuzzy. Okay. So just keep this in mind. That's right. So a thermal regulator and a thermal conformer talks about whether or not they are maintaining the body temperature. But there are all sorts of other variables that bodies can regulate. So we want to kind of keep it a little bit more general now when we're talking about this difference, understanding then that we can apply different variables to these things. So let's play with a graph. So if you wouldn't mind taking out a line. And what we'd love for you to do is to graph, if you're a conformer, to graph the external environment to the internal environment. So what would the conforming line look like on this graph?
I love that moment.
You're all geniuses. That's really good, right? So basically, the external environment, as it changes, we're also going to see those similar changes in the internal environment. Now, the slope can be maybe a little bit different depending on any kind of buffering effect. There could be a bit of a time lag too, right? But generally, you've got it. So that's really good. So what we're looking for is then some kind of influence of the external environment on the internal environmental conditions. Super, super good. And in fact, here's our line. So let me, if you don't mind, I love your rainbow line a lot better than ours. But I am going to clear it because I think we've got some stuff here. Yeah. Some stuff to talk about. So this is the line of conformity.
Some yes ands.
Oh, nice.
That's a line of disconformity. That's very good. Timing is everything. That was really good.
Okay. So line of conformity. Now, why on my line or our line is it not going the whole way? Why are there little dots that kind of extend? Why does it not go from the origin all the way up? What's going on? What's being suggested by that? Thanks, Sam. Yes. Well done. Super good. So it isn't to say that conformers can conform to 100% of the environmental conditions, right? There is a range within which they will be able to tolerate and survive and thrive, right? And yeah, death happens at some point along that line, right? And the length of that line can be very long if you're like, you know, a general kind of conformer, or if you've got specific conditions, then it can actually be really short. So it's kind of cool to understand, you know, when we're talking about conformers, how long that line is.
Now, there was some great chatter immediately in the chat where W. Trollope said it's niche, and I said, which one?
Ooh, nice.
Which one? Throw it. Throw me an answer.
Throw me an answer. Not dead. Good. This is great. Exactly right. Okay. So let's move on now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, you got it. Fundamental. Exactly.
Yeah, good. Okay. Regulators. What would we see on this graph? Go ahead. Give me another rainbow. Oh, Maya, you're getting fancy. I like that. Super.
So tell me in the chat what you're thinking about when you choose different intercepts on the y-axis,
Oh, yeah.
because there's some clear thought here about where you draw.
Where you're
that.
going. Yeah, that's really good. Okay.
Because I like your lines.
We like your rainbow. It's great. Okay, super. So I'll show you ours if you don't mind, and we can talk a little bit about it. But you've kind of essentially nailed it. Maya did some
No thought, just draw.
no thought, just draw. Okay, good. Maya did some funkiness here that I kind of want to attract your attention to, because we've got some funkiness going on. And so what I'd like to do is I'll just clear, and then we can show you a little bit. So here we have our line of conformity. And here we've got that line that we were all just drawing in our rainbow. Super good. What's going on over here, though? What's going on here with our little like kind of lines going off to the side? What's going on? Right here, right there.
The regulator definition is that they attempt to remain constant, but it doesn't mean it's absolute.
Nice.
It might take time to adjust to their conditions.
Crickets. No, it's okay. It's fine. You actually don't have to like come up with an answer. Us asking it puts that little flag in your brain. So
there are limits to their ability to regulate. Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Where the regulator stops being able to maintain homeostasis. Put all of those answers together and you figured it out. That's right. This is what we call hyper or hypo-regulation, okay? So it's like a last-ditch effort, right? So we start to, maybe we'll start to pant, or we'll start to sweat, or we'll start to shiver, or we'll start to try to do things to overcome and to compensate for, getting out of our range. But there's usually some kind of buffer, and there's some kind of like physiological signals of hypo or hyper regulation that can give us a clue that the body may be failing soon. Damn, I'm having a terrible hair. Okay.
Me too. I'm right here with you.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So we want to think a little bit about what kind, like, can we come up with trends and big sweeping statements? And this is going to bother Smith to no end when we think about big sweeping statements. Because studying the invertebrate world, there are no big sweeping statements. There's just incredible diversity. But let's try to come up with these big generalizations, right? Okay, so here we go. We've got a little thing that we're going to fill it together. And I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, like, let's do this together, if you don't mind, okay? So what I'd love for you to do is to get a blue, I think it's a blue arrow or a blue question mark stamp. And what I'd love for you to do is to tell me for ions. So think salt. Is a mammal a conformer or a regulator? And if you think about what about, kind of thing, put it in the exceptions, like, and we can talk about it. But do they regulate salt? Okay. Birds, are they conformers or regulators for ions? Amphibians and reptiles, conformers or regulators for ions? Fish and invertebrates. Okay, yeah, lots of exceptions. That's really good. Okay.
That's great.
Thank you. Let's do temperature now with red hearts. Go ahead for mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, and invertebrates. Sam, you're writing something and I can't read it. MEIO. I don't know what this word is. I'll figure it out. I promise you. We'll get back to you. Okay. Super. Thank you. And some misconceptions to correct, right? You want to go?
I think one of them is that, for one, because we've been through a lot of our swinging through the evolutionary tree of life, one of them is to recognize that the depth of each of these categories phylogenetically is very different. That mammals are not, there's only 60,000 species of them. Birds, less than. Reptiles and amphibians, less than again. Fish, there's lots of fish, but there's still nowhere near as many as invertebrates. So inevitably, when you have millions upon millions of different individual independent lineages of species that live terrestrially, aquatically, and marine, that you have a whole bunch of strategies. And so, in fact, in the invertebrate group in the bottom, many are, in fact, conformers of both temperature and ions, but there are also many examples, terrestrial and marine, of regulation. And that's kind of amazing that we see. But it's as kind of a, we gave you some cartoons here. So as a cartooning of, this is our expectations heading into the world of animals. This is fine. And I love the fact that you got, for the invertebrates, a whole bunch of exceptions.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Cool. So, okay. So yes, mammals are regulators of both temperature and ions. Yes, birds are regulators of both temperature and ions. Yes, reptiles and amphibians are conformers of temperature, but give me a blue smoosh here, please, because they're actually regulators of ions. Yeah. Go, go, go. Make it super blue. Thank you. Fishes, yes, they are conformers of temperature, but I need another blue smoosh here. Right? Yeah. Good. Yeah. So they are not conformers, or else fish would be inedible, right? It would be as inedible as drinking salt water.
And you know this, right? Because you know about salmon, and
Yeah.
you know about the challenges that salmon have to being both living in a freshwater environment and then a marine environment and then a freshwater environment again.
Yeah. Okay, and so Sam has totally introduced a new species to me of an extinct genus of goat antelope called the Myotragus. And I'm going to learn all about this thing because I don't know anything about it, and I'm grateful. And it looks bananas. It looks really cool. So I'm going to learn more about it, Sam, and get back to you. Okay, so good. And then, yeah, invertebrates, they certainly do regulate ions in many cases, but I'm sure there are some that don't.
And they regulate temperature. I mean,
yeah.
And you know this again as well because you know about lots of different species of bees.
Yeah.
Need to heat up and will do things behaviorally in order to regulate the physiology to not conform to the temperature, to the outside temperature.
Right. Okay. So yay. And so lots of wonderful exceptions,
that's
right?
without even jumping into the marine environment. So lovely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Thanks for that. That was good.
I love that.
So here's us just kind of cleaning it up a little bit and adding some questions, right?
Excuse me.
So we're going to talk about hibernation and torpor at some point. We're going to talk about fish that produce their own heat. What? Yeah, there are some delightful exceptions. And so they don't, rewrite the books or anything like that, but they do provide an opportunity for us to celebrate the diversity of what's possible, right? Okay. Super. And
these fishes that some of you even mentioned.
Yeah. So this is the last, today's like a jargon kind of a day. And I hope you're enjoying it. I am, because I like thinking about these things. And I like thinking about opposite things, and sort of the different predictions that would come from that kind of thing. That gets me really excited. So, we want to introduce two more. So what have we done? Conforming and regulating.
Acute, chronic, evolutionary.
And now we want to talk about freeze avoidance and freeze tolerance. And you can make it about avoiding and tolerating any variable.
Whatever your variable is.
Yeah.
Salty.
salt tolerance, salt
Osmotic,
avoidance, right? You can it can be anything, but freeze tolerance is pretty freaking cool. So we're going to talk about it in the context. Thank you. We're going to talk about it in the context of temperature when we talk about avoidance and tolerance. So basically, and again, we have to wrap our heads around like what it is and what it isn't and how we recognize it. Okay. Freeze avoidance means that the organism is going to avoid the actual freezing of their tissues.
And the consequence, if they do freeze, death.
Okay. So it isn't necessarily that they can tolerate really cold temperatures, because a lot of things can without freezing. And we're going to dive into this next class a little bit with a little cool experiment, and it's going to be neat. But they avoid the actual freezing of their tissues. Okay. It doesn't mean that they're not cold. They can be really cold. They can be below freezing temperature, but the tissue itself is not actually frozen. And this applies to, can I say this? The majority of life on Earth.
The majority of terrestrial life.
Okay. Oh no, but also marine.
Yeah.
They don't freeze, right? Okay. This applies to the majority. I've just said something huge. Majority of life on Earth. And
I just said something huge.
And Smith didn't disagree with me. Okay. Now, freeze tolerance is freaking cool because there are a few things, relatively fewer things on Earth.
Comparatively, yes.
that can actually freeze solid. Like their tissues contain ice crystals and they don't die. It's bananas.
And we see this where, like, if you're with us in and around the greater Guelph area, as one of your colleagues has written on the screen there, wood frogs. So this is a species of frog that is common around here.
Yep.
And it is freeze tolerant. It will be a hockey puck, and we'll talk about it on Monday.
Talk about it.
Whereas of American toads, Bufo americanus, which is a toad you've all seen that lives in this area, if it becomes a hockey puck, it's a hockey puck. It's just a dead toad. So they have very different. Their ranges overlap not entirely, but for a large part of their ranges, they do overlap, and their strategies are completely different to dealing with the winter.
Hey, Smith.
Yes, Dr. Jacobs.
Didn't you do a PhD in this?
No, I did an MSc in it.
Okay.
But it was fun.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
So Smith's going to tell you some
yes,
stories.
That's great. Yes, in Captain America.
Captain America can freeze.
Yeah, because of love.
Okay. Amazing. So
Woo,
yeah,
wow.
whoa. So the whole
Following.
idea about like, can humans freeze their bodies and reanimate them later? It's kind of a budding industry. But there are some physiological challenges to being able to do that. We're going to talk about some of those things, of course. But these are the two concepts. So just ask yourself always, is the tissue actually frozen? And as a result, is the organism dead? If the answer is yes, it's actually frozen, but no, it's not dead, that means that it's freeze tolerant, okay? And everything else is freeze avoiding. So some examples of freeze avoidance. It's awesome because they can happen at so many different biological levels of organization, which is so beautiful. And it just depends on the evolutionary history, the context of the ecology, and all of those things to decide kind of which one evolved, right? We've got migration. So, they just peace out basically so that they don't freeze. They are avoiding freezing. So they're going somewhere warmer. We have antifreeze proteins. So they can't go anywhere. So they develop some internal proteins to decrease the chances of it freezing. There are some species that hibernate. There are some that super cool, which is super cool. And then there are some that dehydrate in order to prevent freezing. So they could look like a hockey puck, but they're not actually frozen, so they are freeze avoiding. And so this is why we really have to kind of like dive into the physiology of what's happening to the tissues in order to understand which one is which.
And we're going to dive into a bunch of different examples of these. I think each of these over next week, I guess, Monday or Wednesday next week.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, so we got some fishy examples, some froggy examples, some berry examples.
Yep.
It's fun.
It's good. And here's a homework question to get you started.
Foxy.
So what we want you to do here is we've made a statement. The statement, accept it as true. It is the statement. What we want you to do is to determine whether or not the time scale and the biological level of organization associated with this question or with this statement is correct. Find the one that is correctly matched. The other ones are incorrect, okay? So there's either a mistake in the biological level of organization or there's a mistake in the time scale. So it's just a way to kind of get your mind thinking about the appropriate time scales and the appropriate level of organization, okay? Don't get too mixed up on whether it's tissue or organ. I mean, those are pretty vague boundaries, and so we'll not lead you astray there. But just kind of see if you can work through which one is the correct one. And that is it for today.
Oh, there's a frog peeking over.
There's a frog. Oh, hello.
It's not easy.
Oh, you're a lovely group. Thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
Okay. We'll still be here in a few minutes.
Take care of yourselves.
Yeah.
And we'll stop recording sometime.